Are we all going to get bargain apartments? Let's have a look. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Heiser Says. Now, I thought I'd just do a quick follow-up on the Opal Tower, and let's go through this article written by Jason Murphy about the far-reaching consequences of the Opal Tower. Now, Jason's an economist, and I quite like his pieces. So the Opal Tower may not fall, but prices for new apartments could plummet as a consequence of the building debacle widen. So I suspect a lot of people outside of the construction industry are going to start learning a few things about the construction industry. Could Australia be on the brink of a building quality crisis that causes a meltdown in apartment prices and harms the very fabric of Australian cities? Now, this is a huge problem because a lot of our GDP is locked up in property or the construction sector. A big chunk of it is in a corridor near Sydney. So there's a lot of money in property. And you see on LinkedIn and Facebook all these investment geniuses who just happen to buy a house that shot up in value and then leverage that capital to buy another one and another one and another one. You know, if we've got good times, it's not that hard when you're already set up. So cracking in Sydney's 4-month-old Opal Tower caused the building to be evacuated and left 51 units unsafe to occupy. The specific reasons for cracking in this case are still being investigated, but experts say the conditions that permitted the problem apply across large parts of the industry. I would agree with that. On Sunday, the New South Wales government announced a safety audit of private building certifiers, wow, and construction sites to attempt to resolve confidence in the state's residential skyscrapers, but it could be too little too late. Now, you may remember they had the Masters wiring disaster, where wire that was brought in, electrical wiring brought in from China, was sold in Masters. Apparently, good quality, wasn't compliant, would catch fire. It's in all homes, all throughout Australia now. And I've worked with people who were at senior positions in Masters when it existed, and they would share with me lots of issues and risks that Masters were taking, because you had people that were treating building industry and building materials the same as a can of beans. Okay, they didn't have the understanding of the complexities of what they were dealing with, the dangers associated with these things. If you were providing someone a marble benchtop and had it sitting there overnight but didn't fix it properly because you left for the day and then came back to their kitchen to do some work, someone could bump that, it could come off, could injure someone, could kill someone. There are all these elements of risks that are involved in construction that aren't involved in the other industries. So the building industry is rife with rushed jobs, shortages of skilled trade people, relentless cost pressure and regulations that are not being enforced. I've experienced all of these things. I've experienced rush jobs many times, shortages of skills trade people, yes, cost pressures. I get the feeling that in my industry, in architecture, fees haven't recovered in some regards from the GFC. They're still very competitive with regards to earning a decent fee to cover your cost. And regulations that are not being enforced. Yes, we've had clients that were acting illegally as builders, and we advised them of the issue there and the risks. They ignored us. We did our professional duty of care, and the bodies that are meant to police these things don't care. They don't put any effort in. Falling housing prices this year likely exacerbated the rush as developers tried to finish projects before their competitors. Yes, there has been a whole lot of them trying to just get their project done and out. The pipeline of high-density developments is still near record highs, as the next graph shows. As these buildings are finished and occupied, we may discover the horrendous structural failures inside Opal Tower are the first of many. If so, the impact on Australian real estate could be devastating. Yeah, if this is found to be a result of just the declining quality, look at all the approvals that have happened since 2013, shot up. So 2008, wow. If this is, consistent across the sector, it's worrying. Defective. Apartment defects are common in Australia. One study found 85% of all newer apartments have defects, most often leaks. To some extent, this is expected, yes. That's why you have a defects liability period when you are doing any construction work, essentially, because just the complexity of these unique buildings and things can happen. And you need to have the building experience the environment, so just to discover some of the issues. I live in a house that moves and has cracks, and I expect the same is true of most of us. Well, yeah, you know. Buildings will normally have more quality problems than something like a car. They are not precision made inside factories. Buildings are unique, made on their own sites with their own drainage and soil conditions. Exactly. They are put together by a diverse group of people, mostly working outdoors in a range of conditions. Expecting perfection is unrealistic. Yes, but a lot of clients still expect perfection. And even the factory-produced buildings, you know, the modular buildings, there's still the same element there. Of course, when you robotically produce things and start churning it out, you get some elements of scale, but that is not common practice. What is important is the faults are minimized and fixed safely, or swiftly and safely. It is also crucial that incentives are designed so developers and builders know they will suffer if their work is shoddy. Yes, but you also have to realize some developers will do it, then shut down the business, take their money, go. They'll be let off scot-free. They're complex buildings, they're big. We haven't done these things before, and they've been built quickly because there's a boom on. But there is a whole structural problem with the way in which we produce these buildings, said the University of New South Wales City Futures Research Centre Director Bill Randolph. So yeah, there is. It is a big problem. The incentives were split because the developer was not holding them for long term. I have found that if you have clients in this industry that intend to hold a building for a long time as a long-term asset, they will actually act differently to someone who just wants to flip it, And you can see that in the level of detail and how much effort they want to put into it. Once they've sold it and gotten out of the thing, there's no thought about what happens over the next 30, 40, 50, or 60 years. Yeah. A lot of these buildings that are being chucked up, you know, a lot of them have foam stuck to the outside with render, and they're going to fall apart in a few years. They're not built to last like the older buildings. In this business, it is in and out and off. Yeah. The second layer of the problem is the way responsibility is diffused over architects, builders, subcontractors, engineers, and certifiers. This will be interesting to read, because I find as architects we have to take on a significant amount of liability and risk, which doesn't seem to stack up with the rewards we get. All along the way, there are a whole range of decisions being made by people who have no interest in the whole of the project, but are crucial to what might happen, Professor Randolph said. I'm old enough to remember working on building sites when I was a lad, and there'd be a clerk of works who oversaw the whole thing from start to finish, who kind of patrolled and policed the site. That's a very old, he's showing his age here. A clerk of works is a very old role. It would be an external agent representing the client on the site all the time. So they'd be observing the construction. Because the problem is, as an architect, if you go and do a site inspection, you can only see what they can allow you to see. If you want to open something up to see inside it, and there's no defect proven, the client has to pay for that. So you're kind of taking a risk. So there's less incentive for you to open things up. Sure, you can put holds in place and instruct the builder not to proceed. But if you're getting pressure from the developer, if you're actually working for the builder because it's D&C, it all gets really messy and you can't really do what you needed to do. So this is interesting that clerk of works is being brought up again, because that was quite a smart approach back in the day of how to monitor what was going on site. They don't have these sort of things anymore. Yeah, no, they do not. I actually learnt about it when I worked under the Department of Public Works. They had a program for young architects running our own semi-independent practice. And I remember they taught us all about clerk of works on these big government jobs, because you've got to realize how much money they're spending on these projects, and having someone just patrolling the site and observing the construction process who's got the knowledge and experience to do it, it's well worth it, because the risk that comes out. Maybe you'll have developers saying, approved by this clerk of works, or you'll start getting a quality assurance associated with actually having someone physically on the site. But the problem is, the consumers aren't aware of these type of things. They don't have this knowledge to respond to it. So you could advertise it, and people wouldn't really appreciate what they were getting by having someone monitoring the whole construction throughout the process. They don't have those things anymore. The best they have is a project manager who's come down every so often in a nice suit with a laptop and a spreadsheet. Yeah, exactly. And the danger is you may have a project manager that's come from a non-construction background as well, or the way they act is they're not actually representing the client efficiently. It can get really messy. I've seen it happen. So, are we talking building collapses? No. Australia is not likely to have the same problems as China, where high-rise buildings literally topple over. Yeah, that would be shocking if it were to happen here. Our standards may be imperfect, but they are far higher than that. Structural problems don't mean a building coming down in a pile of dust. Structural failures can make a building uninhabitable well before it gets to that, thanks to leaks, gaps, or being unable to open doors and windows. In some cases, they can be fixed without demolition, but always take significant expense. Yeah, sometimes it costs more to fix than to demolish and rebuild. So when buildings go bad, it can be hard to find people responsible. Apartment owners can get left with the bill. Yes, and that's happened down in Melbourne with the incorrect cladding put on the facade of the building and the fire spreading all the way up there. Now the body corporate's stuck with it. Some builders will say, it's nothing to do with my workmanship. I just built what was specified by others. Yes, they will say that, but the issue is also with D&C, the builder will put alternatives forward. Say you've designed a building, and then it goes D&C, and then you're working under the builder, and the builder says, oh, we can do this all cheap, and puts all these alternatives forward. Boom, boom, boom. Then you, as the designer, have to cross-check everything that they've recommended. So if you are quite thorough in specifying, say, your aluminium cladding, and they've put another one on the table with you that says equivalent, giving you all the certificates of paper, saying it meets all these tests, and you tick off on it, but it's found not to be, what can you do? What can you do? So it's a really hard situation to be in. Meanwhile, architects and engineers will say, nothing wrong with my design, it is a question of faulty workmanship. Yeah. Where an entity can be found that is to blame, they sometimes just declare bankruptcy. Builders can disappear. Exactly. And it's happening more and more at the moment. Where they do, they may be enough to qualify an owner to lodge an insurance claim. A worse situation can be if the builder is not bankrupt but has no assets. Yeah, well, that shouldn't happen, but if the builder does place itself in an administration or liquidation, you can make an insurance claim, but what you do sometimes find is they are $1 companies that just sort of subside and don't do anything. The legal minefield is why owners often end up paying for remediation themselves. I've had friends as well who've done housing work and were trying to get the insurance from the HIA here in Queensland, and they just kind of put their hands up going, no, you've got enough money, pay for it yourself, and it's just a mess. So New Zealand, if you want to see how ugly you can get when the building industry has systematic problems, you just have to look over the ditch at New Zealand. New Zealand is dealing with a giant multi-billion-dollar problem they call leaky building syndrome. It affects tens of thousands of homes and other buildings, and it all goes back to a relaxation in building standards in the 1990s. The price they are paying to solve the problems is far higher than the cost of building things first the right time. This is without account for the health effects of humans living amid so much rot and mold. That is a serious health and safety issue. Their crisis is not the first of its kind and will not be the last. Similar patterns repeat all over the world. So, the surprise about the problems at Opal Tower in Olympic Park is it was an expensive apartment tower. A 2-bedroom apartment there is advertised for $930,000. Opal Tower's structural failure is extremely bad news for the apartment market overall. Market expectations are that top-end developers are put together with care and due diligence. Yes, that is the expectation of the market, but if you've worked on any of these projects or seen it from the other side, you tend to kind of lose that shine. The glossy brochures don't always align up with reality sometimes, sadly. If buyers can't even trust top-end developers, then the whole market for new apartments could have a problem. Well, when buyers can't tell which developments are high quality and which are not, the only way to be safe is to stop buying new apartments altogether. That would be a big negative for apartment prices. Well, yeah, that is true. Even worse is if banks can't distinguish between good quality apartments and bad. There used to be procedures in place that banks would only lend to you if the building was built using certain legislation or certain codes. The banks in some way can have the final power in dictating this. If they can control the lending for the investors, they can put pressure on the developers who they're financing to meet certain requirements. I think the finance sector can, because really it's their asset, their risk. They're probably the more interesting method, or the only body that actually has the power to force these changes, because they're protecting their clients and they're protecting their investment, because that's all they care about is their investment, their risk. Banks make mortgage loans cheaply because they are backed by the underlying asset. The bank gets to own the home if you default, and it gets its money back. There's a difference between a mortgage interest rate 4% and a credit card interest rate of 18%. If you default on a defective apartment with structural problems, the bank is stuck with something it can't easily sell. They don't want that. If banks stop lending for the purchase of new high-rise apartments, then the bottom would really fall out. There is no signal yet they plan to do that, but after Opal Tower's problems, you can bet they will be reassessing all their lending policies. Yeah, I guarantee you that that sector will have an impact on this. The big picture, the future of our country is at stake. The cities where most of us live are changing rapidly, and Professor Randolph says it is crucial that those changes are for the better. All our planning strategies are about building higher density cities, and if we can't build good quality high density housing, then the idea of the compact city and urban consolidation and the battle against sprawl is going to fall on its face, he said. So as I said, Jason Murphy is an economist and he writes for Thomas the Think Engine. I wonder if he cops any copyright claims for that. So I think that's quite an interesting take there by Jason on the fallout from this. I'd be interested to see how the banking sector responds, honestly, because we may need to go back to old ways. We may need to have clerk of works. The banks may need to start dictating requirements on these developers just to protect their own clients, or to minimize their own risk, honestly, because they're the ones taking the risk in the end. Guys, what do you think? Where do you think this is going to end? You know, is it just going to be one or two issues? Because it's looking like there was an article yesterday as well where some tenants or occupants of this building were complaining that they could put a wine bottle on the floor and it would roll across the floor because there was deflection in the slab and they couldn't open doors, which is worrying in a building like this. I don't mind that happening in my old Queenslander because I've got, you know, timber floors and organic soil where it moves up and down. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens. And if you can get a clerk of works job, you know, go for it. It's a good job. So guys, thank you all very much for joining me for this episode of Heiser Says. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all again tomorrow. Bye for now.